The Ming Dynasty was a golden age in Chinese history. It was a time when China was at the center of the world, and today we're going to find out why. After the horrors of the Mongol-led Yuan dynasty, the 14th century saw a new era in China. In 1368, the Ming Dynasty was founded by Zhu Yuanzhang, better known as the Hongwu Emperor, who overthrew the Yuan rulers and established his own government. Over the next 3 centuries, the Ming would become known as a golden age in Chinese history, a time when China would experience a cultural renaissance, becoming a global hub of art, trade, and diplomatic influence. So let's jump in. In order to understand what made the Ming Dynasty so great, we have to start with how they got their start. When Zhu Yuanzhang overthrew the Yuan, he did so with the help of the Huns, the largest ethnic group in China. And to solidify his rule, he needed to win them over. To do that, he rebuilt agriculture, crushed bandits, and promoted Confucian values. He established the civil service exams which had been suspended during the Yuan dynasty. This proved to be effective, because the Confucian focus on ethics helped bring stability to the empire, while the civil service exams gave the Hans a non-military means to gain power. Speaking of stability, the Ming were committed to strengthening Chinese institutions. They created a centralized bureaucracy, used merit-based exams for government positions, and strengthened the power of the central government over regional powers. This created a strong foundation for the dynasty, one that would allow them to pursue other interests like literature, art, and trade. During the early years of the dynasty, China experienced a flourishing of culture. Classical Chinese literature flourished, and many famous works of poetry and art were produced. Painting was particularly popular, especially landscape painting, which captured the beauty of nature. The Yongle Emperor was a particular patron of the arts, and he moved his court to Beijing and began construction on the Forbidden City, which would become the imperial palace for 240 years. But perhaps the most iconic achievements of the Ming Dynasty are the massive projects undertaken by the Yongle Emperor. You've probably heard of the Great Wall, but did you know that much of it was built or restored during the Ming Dynasty? Because of the growing threat from the Mongols to the north, the Yongle Emperor decided to expand and reinforce the wall. In addition, he sent his most famous general, the legendary Admiral Zheng He, on a series of massive naval expeditions throughout Asia and even into Africa. Over 7 voyages between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He's massive treasure ships visited ports from modern-day Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia to India, Arabia, and East Africa. These voyages were the largest and most expensive in world history up to that point, and they projected Chinese power thousands of miles beyond the empire's borders. But unlike European explorers, the Chinese didn't conquer or colonize. Instead, Zheng He's voyages were a display of soft power, establishing Chinese presence and building diplomatic and trade relationships along the way. In fact, the only records of these voyages come from the Chinese and Arab worlds, which is part of the reason they've been largely forgotten in the West. But the fact that China was sending massive fleets of ships all over the known world shows just how confident the Ming emperors were about their place in the world. These voyages also had an impact on global history. They rival the age of exploration for scope and ambition, and predate it by over 100 years, and yet they remain virtually unknown outside of China. In addition to Zheng He's voyages, the Ming also dominated trade across the Silk Road and developed their own maritime trade networks. China traded silk, tea, and porcelain for silver and gold. Much of this silver came from the Spanish colonies in the Americas, which were being plundered by Chinese pirates, but the goods still made it to China via the Manila Galleon, a large trading ship that would eventually make the journey from China to the Americas and back twice a year. In fact, China's influence was felt as far away as Europe and the Middle East. Chinese silk could end up in the hands of European royalty, while Chinese porcelain was prized in the palaces of Cairo. The Ming emperors may not have known the value of the goods they were trading, but they knew they were getting something precious in return, something that would ensure the wealth and security of their empire. Fortunately, internal corruption, natural disasters, and peasant rebellions would eventually bring down the dynasty. In addition, the once Great Wall was no match for the Manchus, a nomadic people from the northeast. In 1644, the Manchus captured Beijing, and the Ming Dynasty fell. ending nearly 700 years of continuous rule by the Hans. Despite its flaws, the Ming Dynasty was a golden age in Chinese history. It was a time when China was at the center of the world, a center of wealth, knowledge, and power. Today, the legacy of the Ming lives on in China and around the world.